Hey guys, hello. Welcome back to the Dyson Photo Tutoring Periscope. How you guys doing? Hey Miss Karen, good to see you again. Okay, so tonight we are going to discuss macro lenses and macro photography. Okay, now as the title says, macro isn't just for flowers. Okay, a lot of people consider macro photography simply a method of photographing things like flowers and insects and all of these types of things, when macro photography can actually be a wide variety of things. Now, it is in general the ability to focus and take pictures of things really close up. However, a lot of photographers will use a good macro lens for portraiture and newborn photography and various other things. Okay, but tonight I'm going to kind of discuss the differences in the lenses, what to look for when you're buying a lens, how to assess which lens is the best option for you. Now, even though I have said in the title that macro photography is not just for flowers, our primary subject tonight is flowers. So have fun with that, right? So after I take a few example shots, at some point this evening, I should have some example photos put on the Dyson Photo Tutoring Facebook page to give a few examples on how to get certain looks with the macro images. Okay, so that will come into play. Now, there are a variety of things to look for in macro lenses. Okay, first off, you need to know that a true macro lens is a single focal length. Okay, there are a lot of lenses out there that are like, say, a 70 to 300 or a 70 to 200 that are variable zoom lenses. Okay, they have a variable range in the focal length. A lot of these are advertised and displayed as a 70 to 200 macro. Okay, it will actually say macro on the box. However, these are not true macro lenses. Okay, these are lenses that may do a little bit better at a certain focal length than other lenses in that category of lenses, but they're not true macro lenses. Okay, a true macro lens is going to be a single focal length. It's going to be a prime lens. Okay, it's going to be a fixed lens. Now, not all fixed lenses are macro lenses, but all true macros are fixed. Okay, you have options such as a 40 millimeter macro, a 60 millimeter macro, a 90, a 100, a 180, a 200. You see how that goes. Okay, they're all fixed focal lengths, and they just have a range to choose from. Okay, so which one do you want? Which one do you need? That really depends on a few things. The camera mount that you're putting them on. I love the 60. Yeah, the 60 millimeter macro is a great lens. But again, that may not be for everyone. Okay, you have to keep in mind what types of things you're trying to do. The number one thing that people need to think about is, okay, you shoot newborns. Newborns is great. Okay, newborns, you can get a good crop and a good composition on the newborn. You can really focus in on the eyes and the little fingers and little earlobes, lots of the little details of the newborn that that you wouldn't think of in normal portraiture, but with newborns it works out beautifully. Okay, but something that's asked to me a lot is, Matthew, how do I get everything in focus? I got a new macro lens and I'm taking a picture of a flower, or I'm taking a picture of a lizard or a bug or whatever, and I focus and I get a very small area in focus on the subject and not everything is crisp. Okay? Well, when you're dealing with a shorter millimeter macro lens, okay, such as this here, I don't know if my camera is going to be able to focus on this, but this is the Nikon 60 millimeter macro lens, okay? When you're dealing with a shorter macro lens of this range, what you run into is that when you get in really tight and close to your subject, your depth of field decreases, okay? So your window of focus gets a lot shallower and a lot more narrow. What this leads to is getting, say, the nose of your subject in focus and the eyes to be blurry, okay? You have a really shallow depth of field. One of the ways to improve on that and to increase that depth of field is to go to a larger focal range on your lens. So this one here, let me see if I can find where it says. Okay, like this is the Tamron 90 millimeter macro. Okay, same principle as your 60. It's just that with a stronger focal length in your macro lens, you don't have to get quite as close to your subject to still get the same composition, which works well if you're photographing subjects that you may not want to be in its personal space. Okay, say you're doing a macro shot of a hornet's nest or of a rattlesnake or a scorpion or something that does not want you right on top of it. A 90 or a 180 or a 200 millimeter macro would be the better option. Say you're taking pictures of these flowers, right? I've got 2 flowers here in the vase. Well, if I get a good crop on these flowers and I'm using a 40 or 60 millimeter macro, and doesn't it matter if you're full frame or not? I'll get to that in just a moment, okay? I'll definitely get to that in a moment. So, but if I want to get both of these flowers completely in focus and still have good crisp detail and good close-up detail, a stronger focal length lens will improve on that. Okay, when you deal with a shorter focal length, again, you get closer to the subject because it's a shorter focal length, but when you get closer to the subject, your depth of field, your window of focus decreases, giving you less window and focusing area to play with. Well, with a stronger focal length, you get to back up. It pulls that subject to you in the lens, and when it does this with a stronger focal length lens, you get a much flatter perspective. Okay, you don't get any warp, you don't get any distortion, and you have a much deeper window of focus to play with. Okay, so again, if you want to get your entire subject in focus, if it's something fairly, moderately small, flowers, insects, small animals, things of this nature, and you want to get everything crisp and deep and in focus, then the stronger the focal length. Okay, I hope everybody is still here. I accidentally got a phone call. I forgot to shut that off. Sorry about that. Okay, so again, the stronger the focal length lens, the better. The more of a window of focus you're going to have, the more detail you're going to get overall. Now, you still can, with a stronger focal length macro lens, get as close as you could with the, say, the 60. You're just going to get a much smaller area of the subject in the frame, which is great for detail shooting. Say wedding rings at a wedding reception, okay? The bride and the groom have gotten married. They're running around the reception doing their thing. I will often come to the bride and groom and steal their wedding ring, sometimes before the wedding, sometimes during the reception, take this wedding ring set and go and place it on a table, say with a cupcake or with a napkin or a place setting or an invitation or whatever, and get really super close detail macro shots of these rings. Okay, if I want to get just the diamonds, I may use a shorter focal length. If I want to back up and get, say, an entire cupcake with the rings and everything in focus, I may use a stronger focal length macro like my 90 that will help me with that window of focus. Okay, now one of the key things, I rented the 100 and the 60 for my crop sensor, and I had to stand like 4 feet away with the 100. You can. If you do have to, if you have to stand really far away with the macro lens, basically that just comes into play with, it depends on what your subject is. It depends on how large or how small your subject is. Now, with the 100 millimeter macro, again, my 100 was on my full frame. But again, with the stronger the focal length of the lens, you can get far away, but still get that same detail. If you get right up on top of the subject with the 100, you're still going to be able to get all the focusing. It's just that you're going to have a much smaller section of the subject in focus. Now, with the full frame versus the crop sensor, you're actually going to have a stronger focal length on the crop sensor. Okay, say you put a 100 millimeter lens of any kind, a macro or a standard 100 portrait lens. If you put a 100 millimeter lens on a full frame camera, you're going to get a 100 millimeter field of view, just like you would on a 35 millimeter camera. But if you put that 100 millimeter lens on a crop sensor body, If it's Nikon, it will be a 1.5 magnification. If it's a Canon, it will be a 1.6 magnification. If it's Sony, it's also 1.5, and then various other brands are different crops. But what this means is that you're going to be able to stand, it's going to pull the subject closer to you in relation to the imaging sensor in the camera, okay? It's going to be like a more powerful focal length lens. By nature of sensor size, Kitty, yeah, that's one of my kittens is in the back. She's luckily being a good cat tonight and just kind of chilling out on the back of the couch. So by nature of sensor size, with a full frame camera, you are generally going to get a more shallow depth of field. Okay, the larger the imaging sensor in the camera, the more shallow the depth of field you're going to get, and the smaller the imaging sensor, the deeper the depth of field, or the more focus from front to back that you're going to have. Okay, so that's one thing that you need to keep in mind too with full frame versus crop sensor, especially when you're dealing with macro lenses. Okay, that will help determine how close or how far away you're going to be able to be to your subject. Now, one crucial thing to make macro photography work to its fullest advantage is the focusing distance. You need to realize how small of a window of focus you really have to play with, okay? So you can see right here what I've got. I'm actually going to remove my camera from this for just a moment to show you what you really need to have for a lot of macro photography if it's not, you know, a run and gun kind of situation. If you're getting true macro where you're really wanting to get close to a tiny subject, if you're trying to get really detailed focus, your depth of field is generally going to be very shallow because you're getting so close to your subject. But once you focus in on that subject, just the slightest little bit of movement backward and forward by you trying to keep your balance, your breathing, just swaying naturally, okay, is going to change where that focusing is going to take place. And so a lot of times you're going to get really blurry images, or maybe even just slightly blurry images, and you're wondering, why was this really great expensive macro lens giving me soft focus? It's not nailing the focus. It's because your window of focusing, your window of opportunity for missing that has increased because that focusing window was so small. So using a tripod is absolutely crucial. Okay, for things that aren't like portraiture, using a tripod is absolutely crucial. Shoot like a sniper. Absolutely. In addition to that, okay, you've got this right here. This device right here is called a macro rail. Let me get it off my tripod so that I can show you what we've got. Okay, this is called a macro rail. All right, your camera will sit here. It will mount to a tripod, okay? And then, via turning this dial here, you're able to tell the camera, or the camera how close or far away from the subject it needs to be. And then this right here, you get to move left and right. So you are getting absolutely critical, fine-tuned focusing with this by placement of your subject, okay? You're able to move your subject wherever you need it to be. Let me get this put back on my tripod here. Oh, wrong way. All right. So once the camera is on this, if my subject, let me see if I can get you guys turned around here. All right. So I've got my flowers here. All right. Get this put back on the camera. All right, here we go. So I've got this on the camera, all right? So say I get my focusing exactly where I want it. But instead of me having to hold the camera and worry about my moving back and forth here, I can move the camera close to or far away from the flowers, just like this, to make sure that I absolutely nail my focus. So once I manually focus the camera, I can make final tweak adjustments this way and focus exactly where I want to go. Now normally I'm not. What lens is that one on there? This one right here is the Nikon 60mm macro, and this is a Nikon D600. It is a full frame digital SLR, so I'm using a 60mm macro that's for full frame on this full frame DSLR. Now, in general, I don't typically advocate for using the back LCD screen of the camera. You are a Canonite. Canons are great. Canons do make good gear. So I don't normally advocate for using the back of the back LCD screen for focusing on your camera, because when you have your camera out away from your body, your arms shake. Whenever you push the button to take the picture, your arms are looser. You're not able to keep the camera steady. It also tends to slow down the functionality of your camera. But with macro photography, speed isn't really of the essence. It's more about time and patience and focusing, okay? So with macro photography, I do tend to use the back LCD screen because it gives me a much larger window to look through to make sure that I nail the focus exactly the way that I want to nail the focus, all right? So we can turn on the camera, get everything set. And another thing that I like to do with look like live, yes, the live view screen on the back, okay? Something else that is going to be absolutely crucial for your macro photography is an additional light source, okay? But you never want to have the light source on the camera, because if the light source is on the camera and you're really close to the subject, like with macro photography, you're going to get a lot of really hard shadows. And really stark contrast from the light because it's so close to the subject. So instead, what I've got here is, I've talked about this in previous Periscopes, I've got an off-camera flash. Okay, the off-camera flash is going to illuminate the subject from the side. It's going to be a nice soft light, and it's going to be able to illuminate the subject while getting rid of the shadows that I might be causing by being right on top of the subject using this here. Okay, finally, for this type of macro shooting, since I'm in my house, I've just got a cheap piece of black foam core, okay, and that is set up behind my subject so that I can get a nice even black backdrop even though I'm in the house. That's what I was wondering, if you had that problem. My alien bees usually don't have that issue. Being right there on top of my newborns. Yeah, like I said, when you're with newborns, and again, off-camera flash is what you would want to use. What about bouncing the flash? Bouncing the flash may work, but if you are really close to the subject, again, with bouncing the flash, you might still not get the right type of illumination. If you're doing portrait work where you're not physically an inch away from the subject, then bouncing the flash is definitely the way to go if you're using your flash on camera. For macro photography, you want to do anything you can to get that flash away from the camera. What flash do you have, Miss Karen? Which camera are you using, I mean? No, since it's not a huge modifier like my PIM, I need to learn off-camera flash. Yeah, I can put a larger modifier on this. I just currently didn't use this for tonight, but I can use an umbrella or a reflector or a softbox, or I have a 24-inch by 24-inch softbox that I could use for this type of thing. Miss Karen, you have a T5i. So with your T5i, if you get a Canon brand flash, or if you have a Canon brand flash, that camera, I believe, has the ability to fire the flash wirelessly from a built-in setting in the camera. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but if you go into your camera's menu setting, I don't have one of those cameras with me, but if you go to the camera's menu setting, go to the flash function, you can tell it to be a commander for your Canon flash, okay? The pop-up flash on your camera is going to fire, but it's not going to affect your exposure, okay? The primary setting of that is to trigger that other camera. It's going to be a pre-flash that flashes much faster than the exposure actually happens. To us, we don't see the difference because we can't register that speed, okay, with our naked eye. But this flash will give a pre-flash and tell the off-camera flash when to fire, and it's full TTL, so it's fully automatic. Definitely recommend that you look into that setting, and if you've got a Canon brand flash, put it to slave mode. go into your camera's menu, go to Flash, go to, I believe it's called built-in flash setting. When you go to built-in flash setting, the first option will be for you to be able to trigger that flash wirelessly, okay? It will change your whole life. It will change a lot about you, the way you take pictures from now on, okay? So again, I've got a black piece of foam core to give me a nice solid background in my image, and that way you don't get I won't get like a background of my couch and my back window and things of that nature. But again, what I can do is put this camera into manual focus, get in super tight on my subject, find the focusing that I want, move my camera back and forth to get the exact placement of the subject, take the picture, my flash goes off, and on my screen I have got an incredibly tight crop of just one of the petals of the flower, giving me exactly the detail that I want. Okay? Now, again, if this was a subject that either A, I didn't feel comfortable being right on top of, or B, that I wanted to get all of the flowers completely in focus, what I would do is I would back up. Okay? I would back up quite a ways from the flower, and I would use the 90mm macro, okay? Because it's a stronger focal length, it gives me more of a depth window to play with. I'm going to get all of the flowers in focus, and it's going to be a much flatter perspective, and it's going to help me improve the sharpness overall of this particular image, okay? Something else that macro lenses are incredibly good for, like we've talked about earlier, is portrait photography, okay? With portrait photography, you want to blur the background. Okay, you typically, okay, you want to blur the background and give that separation between the subject and the background. 90mm macro to 100mm macro, depending on the brand that you're going with, is one of the best options to get that look for your portrait photography. Okay, I particularly like this lens, the Tamron 90mm, just because it has one of the best, if not the best, image stabilization motors on the market, and it is a true one-to-one macro. It is an incredible lens. Okay, something to keep in mind though with well, 85. If you have an 85mm macro, those are great options as well. This just happens to be my favorite one. If you do have a lens that has a vibration control or image stabilization or whatever your brand calls it, if you go onto a tripod for macro work, turn off that stabilization motor. Okay, if you're hand holding for portraiture, have it on, but if you have a motor in the lens that stops camera shake, if you put it on the camera and you have the vibration control on, if you put this on the camera and it's on a tripod, that motor that's in the lens designed to stop camera shake actually creates camera shake. Okay, it's a motor that works against itself because it's looking for movement that's not there because you've eliminated it with the tripod. So this will help with that. Okay. As far as portraiture, you're asking about 85. I do like an 85mm lens a lot for portrait work. It's an incredible lens because it opens up to a 1.4 or a 1.8 depending on which version you've got. But for a little bit more versatility, if you're out running around and you're not quite sure what you're going to be doing, or maybe you want to do macro work and you've got somebody with you that you might decide you want to take portraits later, so that you're not having to carry around multiple lenses, a 90mm or 100mm macro will give you a similar look, a similar bokeh, blurry background, a similar crop and composition without necessarily having to carry two lenses. That way you have a 90mm macro in your bag for macro work, as well as portrait work. If you're shooting a really low light event where absolutely every bit of aperture stop is needed and accounted for, then an 85mm 1.4 is a better option than a 90mm macro. This 90mm macro is a 2.8, still very good in low light, but from 1.4 to 2.8, the 1.4 is better for, again, those events and things of that nature. All right, so again, the differences in the millimeters on macro, 40 to 60 to 90 to 100 to 180. The stronger the macro lens, the further away you can be from your subject, and you have to be from your subject, You can still get in really, really tight with a stronger focal length, but you're not going to get as much in that window. With the stronger focal length, as you back away and it zooms in via the magnification power of the lens, you get a flatter perspective. So you're going to get more of your subject in focus. It's crucial for you to have an off-camera light source, such as this light here, for true macro photography. And I heavily, heavily, heavily recommend that you invest in a good macro rail for precise fine-tuning of exactly where you want that camera to be in relation to your subject. Okay? If you guys have any questions, go ahead and you can keep asking. If not, then please message me on the DPT Photography Q&A Facebook group. If you're not a member of that, please join it. You can visit me on Facebook at Dyson Photo Tutoring. Also, you can hit me up on Twitter. Ask me questions on Twitter at Dyson Photo Tutor. Hope you guys are having a great night. We'll talk to you soon. And if I don't get on here before, then I'll see you next week. I appreciate it, Miss Karen, and we'll see you soon. Bye.